Polar Vortex Event Explained. The frigid temperatures are caused by a mass of cold air that leaked from the polar vortex in the Arctic Circle. The polar vortex is an area of cold, low-pressure air that swirls in the stratosphere above Earth's north and south poles. When it's strong, the polar vortex swirls in a regular pattern above the Arctic Circle, contained in part by a strong jet stream that keeps the cold air up north and the warm air down south. But sometimes the winds that power the polar vortex weaken, resulting in a destabilized jet stream that shoots cold air to the south, what's known as a polar vortex event. Although the polar vortex isn't new, scientists still aren't exactly sure what factors destabilize it and cause these extreme weather events. In recent years, however, some climate scientists have suggested that global warming might be causing disruptions above the Arctic. Does global warming cause polar vortex events? Possibly. Although it seems counterintuitive that global warming might cause sub-zero temperatures, it's known that warm air can weaken the polar vortex. So, considering that the Arctic is warming at faster rates than the rest of the planet, it's possible that global warming is disrupting the polar vortex above the North Pole, resulting in a weakened jet stream, the barrier that keeps the frigid Arctic air contained in the north. To be sure, this theory is still being researched by climate scientists, and what exactly causes polar vortex events is still an open question, as Dr. Michael Mann, the director of the Earth System Science Center at Pennsylvania State University, told CBS News. These questions test the limits of both our available data. The apparent increase in frequency of these events is quite recent and so at best only just starting to emerge from the background noise and the model simulations. A huge mass of Arctic air is sweeping across the U.S., bringing sub-zero temperatures that have grounded flights, closed schools and killed at least 2 so far. Temperatures are lowest in the Midwest and New England, where about 25 million people are projected to face temperatures of -20 degrees Fahrenheit, with wind chills of around -60 in parts of Minnesota and North Dakota. On Wednesday morning, Chicago was colder than Antarctica by 10 degrees at -21. The heart of the Arctic cold has arrived, the National Weather Service's Chicago office said on Twitter. The combined effects of the cold and winds are at their peak today, with wind chills of -45 degrees to -60 degrees continuing. You're talking about frostbite and hypothermia issues very quickly, like in a matter of minutes, maybe seconds, Brian Hurley, a meteorologist with the Weather Prediction Center, told the Huffington Post. What is a polar vortex, and why is it so dangerous? The polar vortex is a large area of low pressure and cold air surrounding both of the Earth's poles. It always exists near the poles, but weakens in summer and strengthens in winter. The term vortex refers to the counterclockwise flow of air that helps keep the colder air near the poles. Many times during winter in the northern hemisphere, the polar vortex will expand, sending cold air southward with the jet stream. This occurs fairly regularly during wintertime and is often associated with large outbreaks of Arctic air in the United States. The one that occurred January 2014 is similar to many other cold outbreaks that have occurred in the past, including several notable colder outbreaks in 1977, 1982, 1985 and 1989. There are several things the polar vortex is not. Polar vortexes are not something new. The term polar vortex has only recently been popularized, bringing attention to a weather feature that has always been present. It is also not a feature that exists at the Earth's surface. Weather forecasters examine the polar vortex by looking at conditions tens of thousands of feet up in the atmosphere. However, when we feel extremely cold air from the Arctic regions at Earth's surface, it is sometimes associated with the polar vortex. This is not confined to the United States. Portions of Europe and Asia also experience cold surges connected to the polar vortex. By itself, the only danger to humans is the magnitude of how cold temperatures will get when the polar vortex expands, sending Arctic air southward into areas that are not typically that cold. In short, there is no cause to be alarmed when you hear about the polar vortex, but you should be prepared for colder temperatures. Check the forecast for your area on weather.gov to ensure you are dressed appropriately. It is also a good idea to check the items in your home and car emergency kits at the beginning of each winter season to ensure you are prepared for any type of hazardous winter weather. How does polar vortex works? While we usually hear the term polar vortex used in the singular, there actually are two polar vortices on Earth, one in the southern hemisphere over Antarctica, and one in the northern hemisphere over the Arctic. These vortices exist because in the wintertime, the air that's high over the poles gets really, really cold. We're talking on the order of close to 110 degrees below zero on the Fahrenheit scale or minus 79 degrees Celsius for the northern hemisphere. That drastic contrast with the temperatures farther away from the pole, and the pressure contrast that results, cause really fast winds, with speeds of between 120 and 250 miles 193 and 402 kilometers per hour, to swirl around the big pocket of cold air. The vortex in the southern hemisphere is even colder than the one in the northern hemisphere. It has faster winds and also much lower ozone levels. Either way, what results is a huge spinning cyclone with cold air inside it, which hangs high over the pole, almost like a halo. If you were looking at it from the side, it starts roughly around the border of the troposphere, the lowest level of the Earth's atmosphere and the region where our weather takes place, and the stratosphere, the next atmospheric layer that begins at about 12 miles 20 kilometers in altitude and contains the ozone that protects Earth from too much solar radiation. The vortex reaches all the way through the stratosphere up to the mesosphere, the next layer, where the air starts to get thin and super cold. From a vantage point high above the North Pole, for example, the polar vortex actually would look like an ellipse, often swirling around two centers, Canada's Baffin Island and a spot in northeast Siberia, and enclosing the icy edges of North America, Greenland, Europe and Asia. The polar vortex is weakest during the warmer months of the year, when there's less of a contrast between polar temperatures and those in warmer regions, and it tends to become the strongest in the winter months. Usually, that barrier of winds keeps cold air in the Arctic, which prevents rest of the northern hemisphere from getting too chilly.